You keep asking why corrupt, manipulative, and deeply influential people are never truly exposed. You see scandals destroy public figures, yet the real architect of power remain untouched, unnamed, and unpunished. This video solves one problem: why exposure fails against real power, and why your mind has been trained to look in the wrong direction. Power thrives in silence, not display. Power does not announce itself because announcement is a request for recognition, and recognition is a first form of dependence. The moment power seeks to be seen, it begins to negotiate with the perceptions of others. It becomes vulnerable to interpretation, resistance, and moral judgment. True power understands this instinctively and therefore withdraws from display, not out of humility, but out of strategic detachment from the emotional economy of society. Most people equate power with visibility. They confuse noise with control, publicity with authority, and attention with dominance. This confusion is not accidental. Human psychology is drawn toward spectacle because spectacle offers clarity. A visible leader, a loud decision-maker, a public enemy. These give the mind something concrete to grasp. Silence, on the other hand, creates uncertainty, and uncertainty destabilizes the average person. Power exploits this weakness by remaining quiet, undefined, and psychologically distant. Silence allows power to operate without opposition, because opposition requires a target. When power speaks, it invites interpretation. When it displays itself, it invites envy. When it explains itself, it invites judgment. Each of these reactions weakens influence by creating friction. Silence removes friction. It allows decisions to be absorbed into reality without being traced back to an individual will. The world changes, but no single figure stands at the center of the transformation. Display is emotional. Silence is structural. Those who seek power often fail because they crave the emotional reward of being acknowledged. They want their dominance to be felt, admired, or feared. But emotional reactions are unstable. Admiration fades. Fear turns into resentment. Attention shifts. Power that depends on emotional responses must constantly reassert itself, and constant reassertion's exhaustion disguises strength. The quiet individual avoids this trap by dissolving into systems rather than personalities. Instead of commanding directly, they shape incentives. Instead of issuing threats, they alter conditions. Instead of enforcing obedience, they make alternatives unviable. This form of power does not feel like domination to those subjected to it. It feels like inevitability. People comply not because they are forced, but because resistance appears irrational, costly, or pointless. Visibility creates accountability, and accountability creates limitation. The more visible a figure becomes, the more they must respond to expectations, criticism, and moral narratives imposed by others. They must justify themselves. Justification is submission disguised as explanation. Silence refuses justification altogether. It denies the public the satisfaction of understanding motives or signing blame. This frustrates the crowd, but frustration without direction dissipates into confusion rather than action. There is also a deeper psychological reason silence protects power. The human mind fills absence with imagination. When power is unseen, people project their own fears, assumptions, and myths onto it. This projection magnifies influence far beyond what open display could achieve. A visible authority can be measured, marked, challenged, and reduced. An invisible force grows in the mind, becoming omnipresent, undefined, and therefore untouchable. Those who rule through silence rarely appear dominant. They do not posture. They do not intimidate. They do not signal superiority. Their lack of emotional display disarms suspicion because people expect power to feel heavy, aggressive, and self-assured. When it does not, they assume it is weak or irrelevant. This misjudgment is the greatest shield silence provides. By the time the consequences of their influence are felt, the origin has already vanished from view. Power that thrives in silence also avoids the psychological decay that accompanies constant exposure. Being watched alters behavior. It forces self-consciousness, performative morality, and reactive decision-making. Silence preserves internal coherence. Decisions are made according to long-term consequence rather than immediate approval. This detachment is often mistaken for passivity, but it is in fact a refusal to participate in the emotional turbulence of the masses. In a world obsessed with visibility, silence appears like absence. But absence is only emptiness to those who require reassurance. To those who understand power, silence is presence without friction, influence without resistance, control without confession. The psychology of fear and projection. Fear is not a response to power itself, but to the uncertainty surrounding it. The human mind struggles most when it cannot clearly identify the source of influence acting upon it. When control is visible, it can be named, blamed, and emotionally processed. When it is invisible, it becomes psychological weight. This weight produces fear, and fear demands explanation. Projection is a mechanism through which the mind relieves itself of that pressure. People rarely confront power directly because doing so would require acknowledging their own vulnerability. Instead, they convert fear into moral narratives. They imagine the powerful as either monsters or saviors, tyrants or geniuses, corrupt villains or noble leaders. These simplified images are not an attempt to understand power, but to make it emotionally manageable. By assigning exaggerated traits to the powerful, individuals reduce the complexity of their own helplessness. Projection serves power by distorting attention. When fear is projected outward as moral outrage, curiosity disappears. Instead of asking how influence operates, people ask whether it is good or evil. This is a fatal error. Moral framing transforms power into a character drama, distracting the mind from structure, incentive, and consequence. While society debates intentions, power continues unchallenged at the level where it actually functions. The powerful are rarely exposed because fear trained people to look for threat in the wrong places. They search for aggression, dominance, and cruelty expressed openly. They expect power to be loud, emotionally charged, and visibly oppressive. When these signals are absent, fear loses its object and redirects itself towards safer targets. Figures who are visible, expressive, and emotionally reactive. These targets become symbolic villains, absorbing public hostility while the real mechanisms remain untouched. Fear also creates dependency. When individuals feel small in the presence of unseen forces, they seek psychological comfort through authority figures who promise clarity. These figures may appear powerful, but they exist to manage fear, not to wield control. By clinging to visible leaders, critics, or rebels, people reassure themselves that power has a face and therefore limits. This illusion is soothing, and so it is protected even when it is false. Projection does not only distort how people see the powerful, it also distorts how they see themselves. By imagining power as inherently immoral, individuals preserve a sense of internal superiority. They may lack influence, control, or autonomy, but they possess moral righteousness. This trade-off is psychologically convenient. It allows powerlessness to feel virtuous rather than humiliating. As long as this belief remains intact, there is no incentive to investigate how power truly operates, because doing so would threaten the self-image built upon moral innocence. The powerful intuitively understand this dynamic and do nothing to correct it. They allow fear to ferment into myth because myth is safer than clarity. A myth can be attacked endlessly without ever reaching its source. A system, once understood, can be altered. Fear, when left unexamined, becomes a circular emotional reaction that consumes energy without producing insight. Power survives by allowing fear to exhaust itself. Another layer of projection occurs when people attribute superhuman intelligence or control to the powerful. This exaggeration again serves psychological relief. If power is imagined as omnipotent, then resistance appears futile, and personal failure becomes inevitable rather than chosen. This belief protects the individual from confronting uncomfortable truths about passivity, compliance, and adaptation. It also protects power by discouraging precise analysis in favor of or in resignation. Exposure fails because it requires emotional neutrality, and fear makes neutrality impossible. The moment fear enters a process, investigation becomes accusation, and accusation invites defense. Defense creates visibility, and visibility creates false victories. A public downfall satisfies emotional hunger while leaving structural dominance intact. The crowd feels relief, not because power has been dismantled, but because fear has found a temporary outlet. Power does not fear exposure. It understands fear too well to be threatened by it. As long as fear governs perception, projection will continue to misdirect attention, turning power into a psychological phantom that is endlessly discussed yet never confronted. The illusion of moral authority. Moral authority is one of the most effective disguises power has ever used, not because it convinces, but because it comforts. People want to believe that influence must justify itself ethically, that those who shape outcomes are bound by shared values, and that wrongdoing eventually reveals itself through guilt, contradiction, or exposure. This belief does not restrain power. It anesthetizes those who might otherwise question it. The illusion begins with the assumption that morality governs action. In reality, morality governs perception. It determines how events are interpreted after they occur, not why they occurred. When people say someone should not have power, they are already too late. Power does not ask for permission, and it does not seek validation from ethical frameworks constructed by those without influence. It operates according to consequence, not conscience. Visible figures are often granted moral authority precisely because they are visible. Their statements, emotions, and public gestures create the impression of accountability. People confuse performative ethics with restraint. When a leader apologizes, condemns, or aligns themselves with moral language, observers feel reassured that power is under control. What they are actually witnessing is theater designed to manage emotional response, not to limit decision-making. This illusion directs outrage towards symbols rather than structures. A spokesperson can be condemned. A public figure can be canceled. A visible authority can be shamed. Each of these acts feels like justice, but they function as release valves. They allow frustration to be discharged without disrupting the underlying system that produced the outcome in the first place. Moral outrage becomes a ritual that stabilizes power by preventing deeper inquiry. Those who truly shape outcomes rarely present themselves as moral authorities. They understand that moral positioning creates expectation, and expectation creates constraint. Instead, they allow others to occupy that role. Institutions, committees, public voices, and ethical narratives are deployed as buffers. These buffers absorb criticism, negotiate legitimacy, and perform responsibility, while real decision-making remains insulated from ethical scrutiny. The belief in moral authority also distorts how exposure is pursued. People look for hypocrisy, contradiction, or personal vice, assuming that revealing moral failure will dismantle influence. But power does not collapse when hypocrisy is exposed. It adapts. Personal scandals affect reputation, not control. The system simply replaces a compromised figure with another symbol, while the mechanism remains unchanged. Moral authority also flatters the powerless. It suggests that although they lack control, they possess moral clarity. This creates a psychological hierarchy where virtue compensates for impotence. As long as this trade-off exists, there is little motivation to understand power beyond ethical judgment. To truly analyze power would require admitting that morality is often irrelevant to outcomes, a realization that feels nihilistic and threatening. The most dangerous illusion is a belief that power fears being seen as immoral. In truth, power fears inefficiency, instability, and unpredictability. Moral condemnation is only dangerous when it translates into structural disruption. Most of the time, it does not. It circulates as language, outrage, and symbolic punishment, all of which leave systems intact. Power survives not by appearing good, but by remaining functional. When exposure is framed as moral revelation, it becomes performative. It seeks confession, apology, and emotional reckoning. These outcomes satisfy psychological hunger, but fail to alter material reality. Power can concede moral failure endlessly as long as control over resources, narratives, and incentives remains untouched. The illusion of moral authority persists because it is easier to believe that the world is governed by ethics than by advantage. Ethics offer meaning, advantage offers discomfort. As long as people cling to moral explanations, they will continue to attack appearances while mistaking emotional victory for actual change. Why the powerful are never where you're looking. The search for power is always misdirected because the human mind looks for intention, personality, and presence. People expect power to occupy a location, to belong to someone, to reveal itself through authority, wealth, or command. This expectation is psychological, not logical. It arises from a need to personalize influence, because impersonal forces are harder to emotionally process. Power exploits this tendency by abandoning the places where attention naturally gathers. Most people search upward. They look at leaders, celebrities, executives, and public figures, assuming that visibility correlates with control. But visibility is often a sign of exposure, not dominance. Those who are constantly seen are constantly evaluated, constrained by opinion and pressure to respond. True power avoids this arena entirely. It does not sit at the top of the hierarchy where everyone is looking. It resides in the structure of the hierarchy itself. The powerful are rarely where you're looking because they do not act through direct intervention. Direct action leaves fingerprints. Instead, they operate through indirect influence, shaping environments rather than issuing commands. They alter rules, norms, incentives, and expectations, allowing others to act on their behalf without realizing it. When outcomes appear to emerge naturally, the mind stops searching for controlling hand. Attention is the enemy of subtlety. Wherever attention concentrates, resistance forms. This is why power positions itself in places that feel dull, technical, or abstract. Administrative processes, legal language, economic mechanisms, and cultural assumptions appear uninteresting to most people. They lack drama, emotion, and narrative. Yet these are precisely the domains where outcomes are decided long before they reach public awareness. People also search for power in moments of crisis, believing that control reveals itself under pressure. What they often see are reactive figures managing damage, not those who shape the conditions that made the crisis inevitable. By the time a problem becomes visible, the decisions that mattered have already been made elsewhere by individuals or systems that will never be associated with the event itself. Another reason the powerful remain unseen is emotional neutrality. People expect power to feel intense, to express ambition, aggression, or confidence. When they encounter calm, detachment, or apparent indifference, they dismiss it as weakness or irrelevance. This misinterpretation is crucial. Emotional neutrality allows power to move without triggering defensive reactions. It passes beneath perception because it does not announce threat. The mind is also biased toward causality that feels proportional. People assume large effects require dramatic causes. They overlook the cumulative impact of small, consistent adjustments. Power often operates through gradual shifts that feel insignificant in isolation, but transformative over time. Because no single moment appears decisive, no single agent is identified as responsible. Exposure fails because it relies on confrontation. Confrontation assumes a visible opponent who could be challenged, debated, or defeated. But power that is embedded in systems cannot be confronted in this way. There is no person to argue with, no statement to refute, no scandal to reveal. The search for an enemy becomes endless because the object of opposition does not exist in the expected form. People also underestimate how willingly they participate in power's invisibility. Convenience, stability, and predictability are psychologically rewarding. Questioning the forces that provide these conditions feels risky and exhausting. It is easier to focus on surface conflicts than to examine the foundations that benefit you while limiting you at the same time. The powerful remain unseen not because they hide, but because they have learned when not to stand. They avoid the spotlight, the conflict, the moral debate, and the emotional exchange. They place themselves where attention rarely goes and where control can be exercised without resistance, leaving those who search for power endlessly staring at reflections rather than sources.